The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Cottonwood Springs, turning heads and silencing the usual morning bustle as Levi Morgan rode into town, his face weathered by sun and hard times, his eyes scanning the horizon as if perpetually searching for something beyond reach. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was still wild enough that a man on horseback with a Winchester rifle across his saddle raised no eyebrows. But the townsfolk knew Levi well enough to give him a wide berth as he dismounted outside Doc Peterson's office, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. "Another one?" Doc Peterson asked when Levi pushed through the door, not bothering to look up from the ledger he was writing in. The small office smelled of carbolic acid and tobacco, with sunlight streaming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. "Coyote got into the henhouse. Figured I'd take care of it before heading to town," Levi replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at the temples. At 32, he looked closer to 40, the harsh life of ranching having etched permanent lines around his eyes and mouth. "Heard the Wilsons are selling up," Doc said, finally glancing up. "You thinking of making an offer?" Levi shrugged. "Don't need more land. Just need the land I have to cooperate a bit more." He managed a thin smile. "Came to pick up those seeds you ordered for me. Figure I might as well try something new this season." Doc nodded and disappeared into the back room, leaving Levi to stare out the window at the town he'd called home for the past 7 years. Cottonwood Springs had grown from a handful of buildings to a proper settlement with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and even a schoolhouse. Still, it was nothing compared to the bustling cities back east that Levi had left behind after the war. The door to the office burst open, and Sheriff Taylor stepped in, his face grim beneath his mustache. "Levi, good to see you in town. Might need your help with something." Levi turned, instantly alert. "Trouble? Of sorts. Got a situation over at the station. Woman came in on the morning train. Seems she's not right in the head. Been talking nonsense since she arrived, scaring the ladies at the Women's Aid Society half to death with wild talk. No one knows what to do with her." Levi frowned. "What's that got to do with me?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "She keeps mentioning your ranch. By name. Says she needs to go there. That she's got a message for you." "For me?" Levi's brow furrowed. "I don't know any women outside of town." "Well, she knows you. Or thinks she does. Name's Gabriella Howard, according to the papers she's carrying. From back east somewhere." The name meant nothing to Levi, but curiosity tugged at him. "I'll come take a look," he said finally, settling his hat back on his head as Doc returned with a packet of seeds. The train station was a modest wooden building at the edge of town, and a small crowd had gathered outside, their voices a low murmur of speculation and judgment. They parted for the sheriff and Levi, some nodding in greeting, others looking away. Levi had never quite fit in here, despite his years in Cottonwood Springs. The locals respected his hard work and self-sufficiency, but the ranch on the outskirts of town that he'd built from nothing remained as solitary as the man himself. Inside the station, seated on a bench with her hands folded in her lap, was a woman unlike any Levi had seen before. Her dress, though travel-worn and dusty, was finely made of deep blue fabric that spoke of Eastern money. Her hair, a rich auburn that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, was pinned up but escaping its constraints in wild tendrils around a face that might have been beautiful if not for the haunted look in her eyes. She looked up as they entered, and Levi was struck by the intensity of her gaze, green eyes that seemed to see through him rather than at him. "Mr. Morgan," she said, rising to her feet, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've come a long way to find you." Levi glanced at the sheriff, who shrugged helplessly. "Madam," Levi said cautiously, "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," she agreed. "But I've seen you. In my dreams. Your ranch by the river. The cottonwood trees. The way the light falls across the fields at sunset." She spoke with such conviction that for a moment, Levi almost believed her. "I had to come. The river will rise. Soon. You need to be prepared." A titter of laughter came from somewhere in the station, quickly hushed. Levi noticed Mrs. Patterson and her daughter, members of the Women's Aid Society, watching from near the ticket counter, their expressions a mixture of pity and disdain. "The river hasn't flooded in 20 years, Sheriff Taylor said gently. Miss Howard, perhaps you should rest. We can arrange a room at the hotel. No, she interrupted, her eyes never leaving Levi's face. There's no time. The rain will come from the mountains. 3 days. The river will swell beyond its banks. People will die if they don't listen. Her voice rose slightly, taking on an edge of desperation. You have to believe me. More murmurs from the onlookers, and Levi could feel their collective judgment settling over the room like dust. The woman Gabriella must have felt it too, because her shoulders sagged slightly, though her gaze remained steady. Sheriff, Levi said quietly, I'll take her. What? Taylor looked genuinely surprised. To my ranch. It's quiet there. Maybe she just needs some peace to get her bearings. Levi wasn't sure why he was offering, except that something in those green eyes called to him, a recognition of solitude that matched his own. Levi, the sheriff lowered his voice. This woman is clearly disturbed. She needs professional help, not a bachelor's ranch in the middle of nowhere. And where exactly do you propose to find this professional help in Cottonwood Springs? Levi challenged. Lock her up? Ship her back east like unwanted freight? The sheriff had no answer for that, and Levi turned back to Gabriella. Miss Howard, I'm offering you shelter at my ranch for a few days. You're welcome to accept or decline as you see fit. Relief washed over her face, softening the tense lines around her mouth. Thank you, she said simply. I knew you would understand. He's as mad as she is, someone muttered from the doorway, loud enough to be heard. Levi recognized the voice as belonging to Thomas Wilson, a cattle rancher whose property bordered his own. Always knew Morgan wasn't right, living alone out there all these years. Levi ignored the comment, though he saw Gabriella's eyes flicker toward the speaker before returning to his face, a hint of apology in them now. Do you have luggage? He asked, and she nodded, indicating a single leather trunk beside the bench. Within the hour, they were on the road to Levi's ranch, the trunk secured to the back of his wagon, Gabriella seated beside him on the wooden bench. She was quiet now, her earlier fervor replaced by a watchful silence as they left the town behind. The sun beat down on them, and Levi noticed how she tilted her face up to it, eyes closed briefly, like a flower seeking light. Where are you from, Miss Howard? He asked eventually, breaking the silence. Boston, she replied, though I haven't truly called it home for some time. She opened her eyes and looked at the landscape stretching out before them, rolling hills giving way to the distant mountains, the land painted in shades of brown and gold under the relentless sun. It's beautiful here. Harsh, but beautiful. Most folks wouldn't see it that way, Levi said, surprised by her assessment. They see hardship and isolation. Perhaps that's why I was drawn here, she said softly, almost to herself. Then, more clearly, I should explain about the river. Levi kept his eyes on the road. You don't owe me any explanations. I do, she insisted. You've taken me in, a stranger with wild claims. You deserve to know. She took a deep breath. I see things sometimes. Things that haven't happened yet. It started after a fever when I was a child. My parents thought it was delirium at first, but when the things I described came to pass. She trailed off, then added, it's not always clear. Just fragments, impressions. The feeling of water rising. The sound of it rushing over the banks. Your ranch, standing in its path. Levi absorbed this in silence, unsure what to make of her claim. He didn't believe in fortune-tellers or soothsayers, but there was something compelling about the way she spoke, without drama or embellishment, as if stating simple facts. Why come all this way to warn me? I'm nobody to you. She turned to look at him then, her expression puzzled, as if the answer should be obvious. Because lives are at stake. Because I saw it, and so I had to come. A small crease appeared between her brows. Wouldn't you do the same? Before Levi could answer, they crested a small rise, and his ranch came into view in the valley below. It wasn't much to look at, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, fields of alfalfa spreading out toward the river that curved around the property. A stand of cottonwood trees provided shade near the cabin, their leaves shimmering silver green in the afternoon light. It's exactly as I saw it, Gabriella breathed, leaning forward slightly. The trees, the curve of the river, even the way the shadow falls across the porch. Something cold slid down Levi's spine at her words. She couldn't have known these details, not unless she'd been here before or someone had described it to her in remarkable detail. And yet, The wonder in her voice seemed genuine. "Home sweet home," he said, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." "It's perfect," she said, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled a real smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and lighting up those remarkable eyes. Levi found himself smiling back before he could think better of it, a rusty, unpracticed expression that felt foreign on his face. As they descended toward the ranch, he wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into by bringing this strange, compelling woman into his solitary life. 3 days, she'd said. 3 days until the river rose. Whatever happened, he wouldn't have long to wait to discover if Gabriella Howard was truly mad or if she possessed a gift beyond his understanding. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent as Levi helped Gabriella down from the wagon. His dog, a rangy blue heeler named Scout, bounded from the porch to investigate the newcomer, circling suspiciously before allowing Gabriella to extend a hand for sniffing. "He doesn't usually take to strangers," Levi observed as Scout leaned into Gabriella's touch, his tail wagging cautiously. "Animals sense things differently than people do," she replied, scratching behind the dog's ears. "They don't carry prejudices or expectations." Levi carried her trunk into the cabin's spare room, which he'd used mainly for storage until now. "It's not much," he said, setting the trunk down and glancing around at the simple iron bedstead with its quilt, the small dresser, and the window overlooking the cottonwoods. "But it's clean." "It's more than generous," Gabriella said, standing in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. "I've imposed on you enough already." "You're no imposition if your warning is true," Levi pointed out. "And if it's not?" He shrugged. "Company might be a nice change." She studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You've been alone a long time." It wasn't a question, but Levi answered anyway. "By choice." "Is it really a choice when it's the only path you can see?" she asked softly, then seemed to catch herself. "Forgive me. I don't mean to pry. You speak your mind. That's rare enough these days." Levi moved past her into the main room of the cabin. "I'll start supper. You're welcome to rest or look around the ranch if you prefer." "I'd like to see the river," she said, following him, "to understand better what I've been seeing." Levi nodded. "We can go after we eat. It's about a quarter mile from the house." As he busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried beef rehydrated in a stew, Levi watched Gabriella move around his cabin. She didn't touch anything, just observed, taking in the sparse furnishings, the books stacked on the rough-hewn shelves, the rifle mounted above the door. There was something careful in her movements, as if she were memorizing the space or perhaps trying not to disturb it. "You read a lot," she noted, indicating the books. "Winter nights are long out here," Levi said, "and the company of good authors beats the alternative. Loneliness. My own thoughts." He stirred the pot on the stove. "They're not always the best companions." She nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "What happened during the war?" The question caught him off guard, and Levi nearly dropped the wooden spoon. "What makes you think I was in the war?" Gabriella's expression was apologetic but unflinching. "The way you carry yourself. The old injury in your left leg that you favor when you think no one is watching. The maps of Virginia on your shelf. And," she hesitated, "there's a sadness in you that I recognize. My brother had the same look after he came back. Before he couldn't stand it anymore and—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Levi had known too many men who'd returned from the war only to find they couldn't live with what they'd seen or done. "Antietam," he said finally, the word feeling like a stone in his mouth. "Then Gettysburg. That's where I got the leg. Mini ball shattered the bone. Doctor said I was lucky not to lose it." "Lucky," she repeated, the word hollow. "That's what they told us." Levi set 2 plates on the table. "Supper's ready, such as it is." They ate in a companionable silence, broken only by the occasional comment about the food or the sounds of the ranch settling around them as evening approached. After they'd finished, Levi washed the dishes while Gabriella dried them, falling into an easy rhythm as if they'd done this 100 times before. As the sun began to set, they walked toward the river, Scout ranging ahead of them through the tall grass. The Cottonwood River wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across at its widest point, but it ran deep and steady, cutting through Levi's property on its way east toward the larger Verde River. Gabriella stood on the bank, her eyes fixed on the water's surface, which reflected the pink and gold of the setting sun. It seems so peaceful now, she murmured. Hard to imagine it turning violet. It's been a dry spring, Levi said, picking up a stone and skipping it across the water's surface. Even if we get rain in the mountains, it would take a deluge to make this flood. It will come, she said with quiet certainty. Not just rain, but a cloudburst unlike anything seen in years. The ground is too hard to absorb it quickly, and it will all rush downward, gathering force. She turned to him, her face solemn in the fading light. You believe me, don't you? Even though it defies reason. Levi considered his answer carefully. I believe you believe it, he said finally. And that's enough for me to take precautions. He looked upstream, where the river disappeared around a bend. If it does flood, my cabin should be safe on the rise, but the lower fields and the Wilsons' place downstream would be in danger. We should warn them, Gabriella said immediately. Levi gave a short, humorless laugh. Thomas Wilson already thinks I've lost my mind, taking in a woman he considers mad. If I ride over there spouting warnings about a flood from a clear sky, he'll likely shoot me on sight. Then what can we do? Wait, Levi said simply. Watch the sky, and if your vision proves true, we'll do what needs doing when the time comes. As darkness fell, they made their way back to the cabin, walking side by side in silence. The stars were beginning to emerge overhead, brilliant in the clear desert sky, and the air had cooled considerably. Levi noticed Gabriella shiver slightly in her thin dress. Nights get cold here, he said, shrugging out of his jacket and offering it to her. Even in late spring. She hesitated before accepting it, wrapping it around her shoulders. Thank you, she said, and then, after a pause, not just for the jacket, for believing in me enough to listen, even if you have doubts. Sometimes a person just needs to be heard, Levi said, thinking of all the times he'd lain awake, the memories of the war pressing down on him with no one to share the burden. Doubts or no, I can give you that much. Back at the cabin, Levi built a fire in the small stone hearth while Gabriella excused herself to change into something warmer. When she returned, she was wearing a simple gray dress with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loosened from its pins and falling in waves down her back. The transformation was striking. She looked younger, more vulnerable somehow, but also more herself, as if the formal traveling clothes had been a kind of armor she no longer needed. She settled into one of the two chairs by the fire, Scout curling up at her feet as if he'd known her forever. Tell me about your ranch, she said. How long have you been here? 7 years, Levi replied, taking the other chair. Came west after I recovered from my wound. Couldn't face going back to Pennsylvania, to all those expectations and memories. Worked as a hired hand for a few years, saved every penny, then bought this place when old man Fletcher decided to move back east. And you've been alone all that time. By choice, Levi said again, but this time there was a question in his tone, as if he wasn't quite as certain of that as he'd been earlier. What do you grow? Besides the alfalfa I saw. Wheat, some corn. Enough to feed myself and sell a bit in town. Got a small apple orchard starting on the north side. 5 milk cows, a dozen chickens, and 3 horses including the plow horse. He shrugged. It's enough. Is it? Her gaze was steady, curious rather than challenging. Levi looked into the fire, watching the flames dance. It has been, he said finally. Until now. The admission hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly. Instead, Gabriella asked, and what about before the war? Who were you then? A different man, Levi said, the memories rising unbidden. Eldest son of a prosperous farmer. Engaged to the daughter of a neighboring family. Full of plans for the future. He gave a bitter smile. I had it all mapped out, right down to how many children we'd have and what we'd name them. What happened to her? Your fiancée. Martha couldn't wait, Levi said without rancor. 2 years is a long time when you're young. She married a man who'd bought an exemption from the draft. Had 3 children last I heard. He looked up from the fire to find Gabriella watching him, her expression soft with understanding. It was for the best. I came back. Changed. She deserved the life she'd planned on, not the half-life I could offer. And you? Gabriella asked gently. What did you deserve? The question caught him off guard, and Levi found he had no answer. No one had ever asked him that before, not even himself. What about you? He countered instead. What brings a Boston lady all the way to Arizona territory on the strength of a vision? Gabriella accepted the change of subject with grace. After my brother died, there wasn't much left for me in Boston. My parents tried to marry me off to a business associate of my father's, a man 30 years my senior with a fondness for brandy and young wives. Her mouth twisted. I refused, causing quite the scandal. My father gave me an ultimatum: marry or be cut off without a penny. So you ran. She nodded. I took what money I'd inherited from my grandmother and left in the night. I've been traveling for almost a year now, following feelings, impressions. Sometimes they lead nowhere. Sometimes they lead to people who need help or warnings. She looked down at her hands. Most people react like the townsfolk today. They think I'm mad or seeking attention. And that doesn't stop you? She looked up, her expression serious. How could it? If you knew something terrible was going to happen and you could prevent it, wouldn't you try, even if it meant being mocked or reviled? It was the second time she'd asked him a version of this question, and this time Levi considered it fully. Yes, he said finally. I would. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their vastly different backgrounds and experiences. Levi found himself wondering what it would be like to have someone like Gabriella in his life, permanently someone who asked the difficult questions and saw beyond the surface to the man he'd once been and might be again. The fire crackled in the silence, and outside, an owl called into the night. It was getting late, and Levi could see fatigue beginning to show in the slight droop of Gabriella's shoulders. You should rest, he said, rising from his chair. It's been a long day for you. She nodded, stifling a yawn. You're right. Thank you again for your hospitality, Mr. Morgan. Levi, he corrected her. If we're going to face a flood together, we might as well use first names. That earned him a smile, warm and genuine. Gabriella, she offered in return, though he already knew it. Though most people call me Gabby. It doesn't suit you, Levi said thoughtfully. You choose your words too carefully to be Gabby. She looked surprised, then pleased. Gabriella then. She rose and moved toward her room, pausing at the doorway. Good night, Levi. Good night, Gabriella, he replied, watching as she disappeared into the small room, closing the door softly behind her. Levi sat by the fire a while longer, Scout returning to lie at his feet after Gabriella had gone. The day had taken an unexpected turn, bringing into his solitary life a woman who claimed to see the future and who somehow saw him more clearly than anyone had in years. Whether her prediction about the river came true or not, Levi had the unsettling feeling that nothing would be quite the same after Gabriella Howard's arrival. Morning brought clear skies and the familiar sounds of the ranch, awakening roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, birds calling from the cottonwoods. Levi had been up since dawn, completing his usual chores, when Gabriella emerged from the cabin, dressed in a simple brown skirt and white blouse, her hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. Good morning, she called, crossing the yard to where he was mending a fence near the corral. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of starting breakfast. You didn't have to do that, Levi said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his trousers. I wanted to, she replied simply. It seems only fair that I contribute something while I'm here. She looked up at the cloudless sky, a small frown creasing her brow. It's still coming. I can feel it. Levi followed her gaze. Not a cloud in sight. Hard to imagine a deluge brewing. It will start in the mountains, Gabriella said, pointing northwest. By tonight, you'll see the clouds gathering there. Her certainty was unnerving, but also strangely reassuring. Levi nodded, deciding to trust her instincts, at least enough to prepare. I'll ride the property today, check the low spots, move the cattle to higher ground just in case. I'd like to help, Gabriella said quickly. I'm not afraid of hard work. Levi studied her for a moment, taking in her delicate hands and fair skin that spoke of a life far removed from ranch work. But there was determination in her stance, and he sensed that refusing her offer would be a mistake. Can you ride? He asked. Since I was a child, she answered with a hint of pride. Though I suspect your horses might be a bit more spirited than the placid Maras I learned on. Daisy's gentle enough, Levi said, referring to his oldest mare. We'll head out after breakfast. The meal Gabriella had prepared was simple but well-made: eggs from the hen house, bacon, and biscuits that were lighter and fluffier than any Levi had managed on his own. They ate on the porch, enjoying the morning coolness before the heat of the day set in. "How did you learn to cook like this?" Levi asked, finishing his second biscuit. "I wouldn't have thought a Boston lady would spend much time in the kitchen." Gabriella smiled. "Our cook, Mrs. Finnegan, took pity on me. Said every woman should know how to feed herself, high society or not. My mother was scandalized when she found out, but by then I'd already learned the basics." Her expression turned wistful. "I've picked up more since leaving home. It's amazing what people will teach you when you express genuine interest." After breakfast, they saddled the horses and rode out across the property, Scout racing ahead through the tall grass. Levi was impressed by Gabriella's seat. She rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent many hours in the saddle, adapting quickly to Daisy's gait. They checked the river first, riding along its banks to identify the areas most likely to flood if the water rose. The river was running clear and low, giving no hint of the danger Gabriella foresaw. Still, Levi made mental notes of what would need to be moved or secured. The cattle should be moved to the north pasture, he decided as they rode toward the small herd grazing in the lower meadow. "It's on higher ground, and there's good grass there." Moving 30 head of cattle wasn't a small task, especially with just 2 people, but Gabriella proved surprisingly adept at following Levi's instructions. They worked together smoothly, with Scout helping to round up strays, and by midday, the herd was safely established in the northern pasture, far from the river's potential reach. They stopped to rest in the shade of a lone oak tree, sharing water from Levi's canteen and strips of dried beef he'd brought along. Gabriella leaned back against the tree trunk, her cheeks flushed from exertion, but her eyes bright with satisfaction. "You're a natural with the cattle," Levi observed. "Sure you haven't done this before?" She laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as him. "Quite sure. But animals and I have always understood each other." She took another sip of water. "Besides, you're a good teacher. Clear instructions, no wasted words." Levi hadn't thought of himself as a teacher. He'd had no one to teach since coming west, but he found he liked the idea of sharing his knowledge with someone who appreciated it. "What else needs doing?" Gabriella asked, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "The root cellar needs securing, and there's equipment in the lower barn that should be moved." Levi squinted at the sun, judging the time. "We can finish before sundown if we keep at it." They worked through the afternoon, Gabriella matching Levi's pace without complaint despite the heat and physical demands. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they had secured everything that could be moved and reinforced what couldn't. Levi even rode to the property line to check on his nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, though he didn't mention Gabriella's warning, simply suggesting they might want to move their sheep to higher ground as a precaution. As they rode back to the cabin in the golden light of late afternoon, Levi found himself stealing glances at his companion. Gabriella's face was smudged with dirt, her hair escaping its neat braid, her clothes dusty from the day's work, and yet, she looked more alive, more present than she had the day before. There was a naturalness to her that struck him deeply, as if all the artifice of her former life had been stripped away, revealing a woman of substance and spirit beneath. "Look," she said suddenly, reining in her horse and pointing northwest. Levi followed her gaze and saw what she'd noticed: a bank of dark clouds gathering over the distant mountains, still small, but unmistakable against the clear blue sky. "It's starting," Gabriella said softly. "Just as I saw it." Levi felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "How much time do we have?" "The storm will build through the night. The water will begin rising by midday tomorrow." She turned to him, her expression grave. "We should warn the town, Levi? The river runs right past Cottonwood Springs." Levi considered this. The town sat a bit higher than the river, but there were homes and businesses close to the banks. If the flood was as severe as Gabriella predicted, people could be in danger. "We'll ride in first thing tomorrow," he decided. "But I doubt they'll listen any more than they did yesterday." "We have to try," Gabriella insisted. "Even if they mock us, even if they refuse to believe, we have to give them the chance." Her moral certainty was both admirable and daunting. Levi nodded, knowing she was right, but dreading the reception they were likely to receive in town. He'd built his life here on the periphery of Cottonwood Springs, neither fully accepted nor completely rejected. Tomorrow might change that balance forever, marking him as either a savior or a fool, depending on whether Gabriella's prediction came true. They returned to the cabin as twilight deepened, both tired from the day's work, but satisfied with what they'd accomplished. After a simple supper, they sat on the porch, watching as the cloud bank in the northwest grew larger, occasionally illuminated from within by distant lightning. "Tell me more about your visions," Levi said, curious now that he'd seen the first signs of her prediction coming true. "How do they come to you?" Gabriella was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's not like seeing the future laid out clearly," she explained. "More like fragments, impressions, strong feelings that something is going to happen in a certain place at a certain time." She clasped her hands in her lap, looking out at the darkening land. "Sometimes they come in dreams. Sometimes when I'm awake, like a memory of something that hasn't happened yet. They're strongest when lives are at stake. And they're always true? These visions." She shook her head. "Not always. Or perhaps I don't always interpret them correctly. There have been times I've warned of danger that never materialized, or arrived too late to make a difference." A shadow crossed her face. "My brother. I saw his death coming, but I didn't understand what I was seeing until it was too late." "That's a heavy burden to carry," Levi said softly. "It is," she agreed, "especially when no one believes you. When they look at you as if you're something broken or wrong." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Why did you believe me, Levi? When everyone else was ready to dismiss me as mad?" Levi considered this, trying to articulate what had compelled him to trust her. "I've seen too much in this life to dismiss anything out of hand," he said finally. "And there was something in your eyes. A certainty that went beyond mere conviction. I've seen that look before, in men who knew things they couldn't possibly know. Like the soldier who woke our camp in the middle of the night, insisting we move positions, just hours before Confederate artillery shelled exactly where we'd been sleeping. Did people believe him? Our captain did. Said later he didn't know why, just that something told him to listen." Levi shrugged. "Saved 30 lives that night." They fell silent, watching as stars began to appear overhead, though fewer than the night before as clouds gradually moved in from the mountains. The air felt different. Levi realized heavier, charged with the promise of the coming storm. "We should get some rest," he said eventually. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Gabriella nodded, rising from her chair. "Levi," she said hesitantly, "thank you for today. For treating me like a capable person, not a delicate flower or a madwoman." "You proved yourself capable," he replied simply. "Hard work speaks for itself out here." She smiled at that, a warm smile that reached her eyes and did something strange to Levi's heart, making it beat a little faster than usual. "Good night, then," she said, turning toward the door. "Good night, Gabriella," he answered, remaining on the porch as she went inside. Levi sat a while longer, watching the distant lightning and thinking about the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. There was something both familiar and utterly new about Gabriella Howard, as if she were someone he'd always known but had only just met. The thought should have unsettled him. He'd grown accustomed to his solitude, had embraced it as protection against the pain of loss. And yet, as he finally rose to go inside, Levi found himself hoping that whatever happened with the river, Gabriella might choose to stay a little longer in Cottonwood Springs. Dawn broke with an ominous sky, dark clouds now covering much of the horizon and moving steadily eastward. Levi and Gabriella were up early, preparing for the ride into town. The air was heavy with moisture, and a steady wind had picked up, bending the tall grass and making the cottonwood leaves flutter nervously. "It's coming faster than I expected," Gabriella said as they saddled the horses. "We need to hurry." They rode hard, pushing the horses as much as they dared on the increasingly muddy track to town. By the time they reached Cottonwood Springs, a light rain had begun to fall, the first drops splattering in the dust of the main street and raising a smell of wet earth and stone. The town was going about its morning business as usual, though people hurried a bit more than normal, glancing up at the darkening sky with concern. Several heads turned as Levi and Gabriella rode in, and Levi heard the whispers start immediately. "There's Morgan with that crazy woman. What's he thinking, bringing her back to town? Heard she's been filling his head with nonsense about floods. Levi ignored the comments, dismounting in front of the sheriff's office and helping Gabriella down from her horse. She stood tall beside him, her chin raised, refusing to be cowed by the stares and whispers. Sheriff Taylor was at his desk when they entered, looking up with a frown at the sight of them. "Levi, Miss Howard." He greeted them, setting down his pen. "Didn't expect to see you back in town so soon." "Sheriff, we need to warn people," Levi said without preamble. "The river's going to flood, just like Gabriella predicted. There's a major storm coming in from the mountains." Taylor's eyes flicked to the window, where the rain was now falling more steadily. "We get storms this time of year, Levi. Doesn't mean the river's going to flood. This isn't an ordinary storm." Gabriella stepped forward, her voice steady despite the skepticism on the sheriff's face. "The rain in the mountains has already started, heavier than what you're seeing here. It will send a wall of water down the river by midday." "And you know this how exactly?" Taylor asked, his tone making it clear he already knew and dismissed her answer. "I've seen it," she said simply. "The same way I saw Levi's ranch before I ever set foot in Arizona territory." The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I understand you folks are concerned, but I can't go alarming the whole town based on feelings." "Then don't," Levi said, leaning forward, his hands on the sheriff's desk. "Just suggest that people move valuable property away from the riverbank as a precaution. Tell them there's heavy rain in the mountains." "That's true enough." Taylor considered this, then nodded slowly. "I suppose that's reasonable. No harm in being cautious." He stood up, reaching for his hat. "I'll speak to those closest to the river, suggest they move what they can. But," he added, fixing Gabriella with a stern look, "I won't be mentioning visions or predictions. People are superstitious enough around here." "As long as they're warned," Gabriella said, relief evident in her voice. They followed the sheriff out into the rain, which was falling harder now, drumming on the boardwalks and forming puddles in the street. A small crowd had gathered outside, curious about Levi and Gabriella's return to town. Morgan finally bringing his crazy woman back where she belongs. Thomas Wilson called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the rain. "Or has she convinced you the sky's falling too?" Levi felt a surge of anger, but before he could respond, Gabriella stepped forward, facing Wilson directly. "The sky isn't falling, Mr. Wilson, but the river is rising. If your ranch is as close to the banks as I believe it is, you're in danger." Wilson sneered, looking around at the gathered townsfolk for support. "Hear that, folks? The Madwoman's making more predictions. What's next, locusts? Frogs raining from the sky?" There was scattered laughter, though some people looked uneasy, glancing at the increasingly heavy rainfall. "Mock all you want," Gabriella said, her voice clear and carrying. "But move your family to higher ground. Take what's precious to you and go. By nightfall, the lower pastures will be underwater." "My family's lived on that land for 15 years, Wilson retorted. "Never flooded once." "Then you're due," Levi said quietly, stepping up beside Gabriella. "The sheriff's advising everyone near the river to take precautions. You'd be wise to listen." Wilson's face darkened with anger. "You stay out of this, Morgan. Everyone knows you've lost your mind over this woman." "Probably hasn't been a woman on your ranch since you came west, has there?" "Makes a man susceptible to all kinds of nonsense." A murmur ran through the crowd at this crude insinuation. Levi felt his hands clench into fists, but Gabriella's light touch on his arm stayed him. "We've said what we came to say," she told him softly. "Some will listen, some won't. We can't force them." She was right, Levi knew. They'd done what they could. "We should get back to the ranch," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Anyone who wants shelter on higher ground is welcome to join us there." With that, he helped Gabriella back onto her horse, aware of the stairs following them as they rode out of town. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. They rode in silence, both lost in their own thoughts as they made their way back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, they were soaked through, their horses struggling in the mud that the trail had become. The ranch itself looked grim in the downpour, but Levi felt a surge of relief that they'd taken precautions the day before. The cattle were safe on high ground, and everything valuable had been moved or secured. Inside the cabin, they changed into dry clothes, Gabriella emerging from her room in a simple dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes. Levi built up the fire, trying to take the damp chill out of the air as the rain continued to drum on the roof. "Do you think anyone will listen?" Gabriella asked, sitting by the fire and spreading her hands toward its warmth. "Some might," Levi replied, joining her. "The sheriff will do his part. And there are folks in town who are more practical than Wilson, who'll take precautions just based on the weather." He looked out the window, where the rain showed no signs of letting up. "But there will be losses. There always are. I should have come sooner," Gabriella said, regret heavy in her voice. "Given people more time to prepare." "You came as soon as you could," Levi reassured her. "And we've done what we can with the time we had." They spent the morning watching the storm intensify, the rain falling in blinding sheets, driven by a wind that made the cabin creak and groan. Around noon, Levi pulled on his oilskin coat. "I need to check the river," he said. "Make sure our preparations are holding." "I'm coming with you," Gabriella said immediately, reaching for her own coat. "It's dangerous out there," Levi protested. "All the more reason not to go alone," she countered, her expression determined. Recognizing the futility of argument, Levi nodded, and they ventured out into the storm. The wind nearly took their breath away, and they had to lean into it as they made their way toward the river. Scout followed at their heels, clearly unhappy but unwilling to be left behind. What they saw when they reached the riverbank made them both stop short. The Cottonwood River, normally a peaceful waterway maybe 30 feet across, had swollen to 3 times its usual width. The water rushed by in a muddy torrent, carrying branches, small trees, and debris from upstream. Even as they watched, a section of the bank collapsed, swallowed by the churning water. "It's happening, just as you said," Levi had to shout to be heard over the roar of the river and the howling wind. Gabriella nodded, her face pale but composed. "And it will get worse before it gets better. The main surge is still coming." They made their way along the bank, checking the areas closest to the ranch buildings, relieved to find that the cabin and main barn were well above the water's reach. The lower barn, however, was already standing in several inches of water, though the equipment inside had been moved the day before. As they turned to head back to the cabin, a shout carried faintly over the storm's noise. Levi squinted through the rain and was shocked to see figures approaching on horseback, 3 riders, pushing hard through the downpour. "Someone's coming," he called to Gabriella, pointing. They waited, and as the riders drew closer, Levi recognized the Henderson family: John, his wife Mary, and their teenage son Daniel. The Hendersons' small ranch bordered Levi's to the south, right along the river. "Levi," John called as they came within earshot. "Thank God you're here." "What happened?" Levi asked, helping Mary from her horse. The woman was soaked and shivering, her face streaked with tears or rain, or both. "River took our cabin," John said grimly. "Rose so fast we barely had time to get the horses. Everything else is gone." "Are you hurt?" Gabriella asked, immediately taking charge of Mary, putting an arm around the woman's shoulders. "Just shaken," Mary managed to say through chattering teeth. "If John hadn't insisted we move the sheep to higher ground yesterday after your visit, Levi, we'd have lost them too." "Come inside," Levi said, leading the way back to the cabin. "Get warm and dry. You're welcome to stay as long as needed." Once inside, Gabriella quickly organized dry clothes for the Hendersons, some of Levi's things for John and Daniel, and one of her own dresses for Mary, though it was a bit short on the taller woman. Levi built up the fire and put coffee on to boil, while Gabriella found blankets and set about making a hot meal. "We didn't know where else to go," John said as they huddled by the fire. "Town's probably flooded by now, too." "You did right coming here," Levi assured him. "We're on high enough ground to be safe." "How did you know?" Daniel asked, looking from Levi to Gabriella. "Pa said you warned him yesterday, before the storm even started." Levi glanced at Gabriella, who was busy at the stove, her back to them. "Let's just say we had reason to be cautious," he said diplomatically. Mary Henderson, however, wasn't so easily deflected. "It was her, wasn't it?" she said quietly, nodding toward Gabriella. "The woman they're talking about in town. The one who predicted the flood." Levi nodded, watching for their reaction. "Then we owe her our lives," Mary said simply. "And anyone who calls her mad is a fool." The simple statement, delivered with complete conviction, seemed to lift something from Gabriella's shoulders. She turned from the stove, her eyes meeting Levi's with a look of surprised gratitude. The day wore on, the storm continuing unabated. By mid-afternoon, they were joined by 2 more families from neighboring ranches, driven to seek higher ground as the river continued to rise. The cabin was crowded now with 11 people, but Levi found he didn't mind. There was something comforting about the bustle and conversation after so many years of solitude. Most striking was the way Gabriella moved through it all, organizing sleeping arrangements, ensuring everyone had food and dry clothes, listening to stories of narrow escapes with genuine concern. She showed no sign of the madwoman the townsfolk had labeled her, only competence and compassion that earned her the respect of their unexpected guests. As evening approached, the rain finally began to slacken, though the sound of the river remained a constant roar in the background. Levi and John Henderson ventured out to check the water level and found that while the river had crested, it was still dangerously high, cutting off the road to town completely. "We'll need to wait until morning to check on Cottonwood Springs," Levi said when they returned. "No way to get through safely in the dark." The news was met with worried murmurs from the gathered families, many of whom had friends or relatives in town. Gabriella moved among them, offering reassurance, her quiet confidence a balm to their fears. Later, as the others bedded down for the night wherever space could be found, Levi and Gabriella stood on the porch, watching as the clouds began to break, revealing patches of star-filled sky. "You were right about everything," Levi said softly. "The storm, the timing, all of it." "I wish I hadn't been," Gabriella replied, her gaze on the dark landscape where the swollen river gleamed faintly in the emerging moonlight. "How many in town ignored the warnings, I wonder?" "We'll find out tomorrow," Levi said. "But thanks to you, many did listen." The sheriff would have spread the word, and the Hendersons aren't the only ones who took precautions. "I couldn't have done anything without you, Levi," she said, turning to face him. "You gave me credibility, a platform. You believed in me when no one else would." "It wasn't hard to believe in you," Levi said, surprised by the truth of his own words. In just 2 days, Gabriella had become someone he trusted implicitly, someone whose strength and compassion he admired deeply. She smiled, the moonlight casting her face in silver and shadow. "I've been running for so long," she said quietly. "Always moving, never belonging anywhere. But here, with you." She trailed off, as if uncertain how to express what she was feeling. Levi understood, because he felt it too, a connection that defied explanation, a sense that somehow, against all odds, they had found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. "You could stay," he said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. "After the floodwaters recede, I mean. Cottonwood Springs could use someone with your gifts." "And you?" Gabriella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could you use someone like me in your life, Levi Morgan?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning and possibility. Levi really looked at her, and saw not a madwoman or a mystic, but simply Gabriella, with her courage and her doubts, her strength and her vulnerability, all the complex facets that made her who she was. "I think," he said slowly, "that my life has been half lived until now, and I'd like to discover what the other half might be, with you beside me." Gabriella's eyes widened, and for a moment, Levi feared he'd spoken too boldly, too soon. But then she smiled, a smile so radiant it seemed to illuminate the night around them. "I'd like that too," she said simply. Levi reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly, their fingers interlacing as naturally as if they'd been doing so for years. Together they stood on the porch, watching as the clouds continued to part, revealing more and more stars, a promise of clearer skies to come. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having moved on during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The river had begun to recede, though it was still well beyond its banks, and the road to town remained impassable by wagon. After breakfast, Levi and John Henderson saddled horses to ride into Cottonwood Springs and assess the damage. Gabriella came out to the barn as they were preparing to leave. "Be careful," she said, helping Levi check his saddle cinch. "There will be debris everywhere, and the ground is treacherous." "We will," Levi promised. "We'll be back before sundown, with news of the town." "I know," Gabriella said with a small smile. I've seen it. Levi smiled back, still marveling at the ease with which he now accepted her visions. And is the news good? Better than we feared, worse than we hoped, she replied. But Cottonwood Springs will survive, as it always has. With that cryptic assessment to ponder, Levi and John set out, picking their way carefully across the sodden landscape. The destruction was evident everywhere they looked: fences washed away, fields underwater, trees uprooted by the force of the flood. But as they drew closer to town, Levi was relieved to see that the damage, while significant, was not catastrophic. Cottonwood Springs itself was a hive of activity when they arrived, with people working together to clear debris and salvage what could be saved. The river had indeed flooded the lower part of town, but most buildings remained standing, though muddied and damaged. Sheriff Taylor spotted them as they rode in and came to meet them, his clothes caked with mud, but his expression relieved. Morgan, Henderson, good to see you both in one piece. How'd you fare out at your places? My cabin's gone, John said grimly. But we got out in time, thanks to Levi's warning. Been sheltering at his ranch with some other families. The sheriff nodded, then turned to Levi. And your place? High enough to escape the worst of it, Levi replied. What about the town? Any casualties? Taylor's face sobered. 2 dead, I'm afraid. Old Mrs. Jameson refused to leave her home by the river, and young Billy Tucker got caught trying to save some horses from the livery stable. He shook his head sadly. Could have been worse, though. Most people took precautions after I spread the word. And Wilson? Levi asked, thinking of the man who had been so vocal in his mockery. Lost most of his cattle and his barn, Taylor said. House is still standing, but it took on several feet of water. He's over at the saloon, now it's serving as a shelter for those who lost their homes. Levi and John spent the day helping with the cleanup efforts, working alongside townsfolk who greeted Levi with new respect. Word had spread about Gabriella's prediction and how those who heeded it had fared better than those who scoffed. Late in the afternoon, as they were preparing to head back to the ranch, Thomas Wilson approached Levi outside the general store, where volunteers were distributing supplies to those in need. The rancher looked haggard, his usual bluster replaced by a subdued weariness. Morgan, he said, nodding stiffly. Heard your place came through all right. It did, Levi confirmed, waiting to see where this was going. Wilson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. That woman of yours. She was right about the flood. She was, Levi agreed, offering nothing more. Reckon I owe her an apology, Wilson admitted grudgingly. And you too, for the things I said. It wasn't much as apologies went, but Levi recognized the effort it must have cost the proud rancher. We all make misjudgments, he said, extending his hand. What matters is learning from them. Wilson looked surprised but took the offered hand, shaking it firmly. Tell her thanks, for trying to warn us, even when we didn't deserve it. I will, Levi promised, feeling a weight lift that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The rift between him and the town had begun to heal, bridged by the very woman they had once mocked. When Levi and John returned to the ranch that evening, they brought news of the town's condition and a wagon full of supplies donated by the general store owner for the families sheltering at Levi's. The mood was somber as they shared the news of the 2 deaths, but there was also relief that the toll hadn't been higher. Gabriella listened to their report, her face reflecting the complex emotions of the day: sorrow for the lives lost, relief for those saved, hope for the recovery to come. When Levi relayed Wilson's apology, she nodded, accepting it without triumph or bitterness. What happens now? Mary Henderson asked as they all sat around the fire after supper, the question that had been on everyone's mind. For those of us who lost everything, we rebuild, John said firmly, taking his wife's hand. It's what we do out here. You're welcome to stay here until you can get back on your feet, Levi offered. All of you. The offer was met with grateful nods and murmurs of thanks. As the evening wore on, plans began to take shape, neighbors offering to help the Hendersons rebuild their cabin, arrangements made to salvage what could be found when the flood waters fully receded, a communal effort to restore what had been lost. Later, when the others had gone to bed, Levi and Gabriella found themselves alone by the fire, the events of the past few days settling around them like the silence after a storm. You've given them hope, Gabriella said softly, watching the flames dance. A place to stay, a promise of help. It means more than you know. We've given them hope, Levi corrected her. Your warnings save lives, Gabriella. People know that now. She smiled, a hint of wonder in her expression. It's strange. All my life, my visions have been a burden, something that set me apart, made people fear me. But here, with you. She hesitated, then continued. With you, they feel like a gift. Something to be shared, not hidden. That's what they are, Levi said, reaching for her hand. A gift, just like you coming into my life when I'd resigned myself to solitude. Gabriella looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Levi, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I meant what I said last night. About staying. And I meant what I said about wanting you to, Levi replied, his voice low and earnest. But I want you to be sure. Life out here isn't easy, even without the floods and storms. I've never been more sure of anything, Gabriella said, squeezing his hand. For the first time in my life, I feel like I've found where I belong. With you, in this place, doing whatever good we can together. The simplicity and certainty of her words touched something deep within Levi, a place he'd thought long sealed off by war and loss and years of isolation. Looking at Gabriella now, he saw not just the present moment, but a possible future one filled with purpose and companionship, with hardship, yes, but also with joy. Then stay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Stay and help me build something here that's more than just surviving. Something worth living for. Gabriella's answer was to lean forward and press her lips gently to his, a kiss that held both promise and question. Levi responded with careful tenderness, aware of the newness and fragility of what was growing between them, but also of its strength and potential. When they parted, Gabriella's cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were clear and certain. I believe that's a yes, Mr. Morgan, she said with a smile that lit up her entire face. Levi laughed softly, feeling lighter than he had in years. I believe it is, Miss Howard. The days that followed were filled with hard work and gradual recovery. The flood waters receded, revealing the full extent of the damage but also offering the chance to begin rebuilding. The families staying at Levi's ranch returned to their own properties one by one as conditions improved, but they came back regularly to help with repairs and share meals, a community forming where before there had been mostly solitary homesteads. Gabriella's presence changed everything, not just for Levi, but for the entire area. Her prediction of the flood had earned her respect, and people began to seek her out for advice and insight. She never claimed to know everything, was careful to explain the limitations and uncertainties of her gift, but she shared what she could, using her visions to help where possible. A month after the flood, with summer now in full bloom across the land, Levi and Gabriella rode into Cottonwood Springs together. The town had largely recovered, though signs of the disaster remained in water-stained buildings and empty lots where structures had been washed away. They dismounted outside the general store, where a small crowd had gathered for what had become a weekly meeting to coordinate continued recovery efforts. Morgan, Miss Howard, Sheriff Taylor called, waving them over. Glad you could make it. We're discussing the new bridge design. As they joined the group, Levi was struck by how differently they were received now. Where once there had been suspicion and distance, now there were friendly greetings and genuine inclusion. Gabriella, in particular, was welcomed warmly, her insights valued and her presence appreciated. The meeting was productive, with plans finalized for a stronger bridge across the river and arrangements made for a town celebration to mark 2 months since the flood, a way to acknowledge what had been lost, but also to celebrate the community's resilience. As they were preparing to leave, Thomas Wilson approached them, his manner still somewhat awkward but sincere. Miss Howard, I was wondering if I might have a word with you about the best place to rebuild my barn. I've been considering several locations, and well. He cleared his throat. I thought you might have some insight. Gabriella exchanged a quick glance with Levi, who nodded encouragingly. I'd be happy to help, Mr. Wilson, she said. Why don't you show me the spots you're considering? As Gabriella walked off with Wilson, Doc Peterson sidled up to Levi, a knowing look in his eye. That's quite a woman you've found yourself, Morgan. She found me, Doc, Levi corrected with a smile. And yes, she is. Wedding bells in the future? The doctor asked casually, though his interest was anything but casual. Levi watched Gabriella across the street, her hands moving expressively as she talked with Wilson, her face animated and engaged. "If she'll have me," he said quietly. "Been thinking about asking her properly once the new cabin for the Hendersons is finished." Doc clapped him on the shoulder. "About time, I'd say. Never seen you look so alive, Levi. Not in all the years you've been here." That evening, as they rode home together in the golden light of sunset, Levi found himself stealing glances at Gabriella, marveling at how completely she had transformed his life in such a short time. She caught him looking and smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made his heart skip. "What are you thinking about so intently?" she asked. "The future," Levi replied honestly. "Our future, if you want one with me." Gabriella reined in her horse, and Levi did the same, the two of them pausing on the trail as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected in her eyes. "I want that more than anything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "A future with you. Here in this place we've made our own. Even though I'm just a solitary rancher who doesn't always know the right things to say?" Levi asked, a hint of his old insecurity surfacing. Gabriella shook her head, her expression tender. "You're the man who believed in me when no one else would, who offered shelter and understanding when others saw only madness, who's been rebuilding not just homes, but an entire community with his own two hands." She reached across the space between their horses to touch his face gently. "You're the man I love, Levi Morgan. And the right things to say are the ones that come from your heart." The simple declaration of love, spoken so plainly and with such certainty, left Levi momentarily speechless. He'd known, of course, in the way they'd grown closer over the past month, in the small touches and shared glances, in the way they worked together as if they'd been doing so all their lives. But hearing the words aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I love you too, Gabriella," he said finally, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on his tongue. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone again." He dismounted and helped her down from her horse, drawing her into his arms as the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape around them. They stood there on the trail, holding each other as the day faded into dusk, the promise of their future together as vast and hopeful as the Arizona sky above them. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. The Hendersons' new cabin was completed with the help of neighbors and townspeople, stronger and better situated than the one the river had claimed. Other homes and businesses were rebuilt, and gradually, life in Cottonwood Springs and the surrounding ranches returned to a semblance of normalcy, though forever changed by the flood and its aftermath. Gabriella officially moved into Levi's cabin, though in truth, she had never left after that first night. They fell into an easy rhythm together, her presence filling the spaces that had been empty for so long. She helped with the ranch work, learning quickly and bringing her own ideas and energy to the tasks. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they both now called home. Word of Gabriella's gift spread beyond Cottonwood Springs, and occasionally people would come from neighboring settlements seeking her insight. She helped where she could, always careful not to promise more than she could deliver, but grateful for the chance to use her visions for good. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the promise of winter to come, Levi took Gabriella on a picnic to a special spot on the ranch, a small rise overlooking the river, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the changing season. He'd been planning this day for weeks, working in secret on a surprise that he hoped would please her. They spread a blanket under the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, sharing a simple meal and talking about plans for the coming winter. As they finished eating, Levi reached into his pocket, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his youth. "Gabriella," he began, his voice more serious than usual, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose back to me when I thought both were gone forever." She smiled, her eyes soft with love, but let him continue without interruption. "I know we've talked about the future, about building a life together," Levi went on, drawing a small wooden box from his pocket. "But I wanted to do this properly, to ask you the question that's been in my heart since the day you predicted the river would rise." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond set in silver, elegant and understated, just like the woman it was meant for. Gabriella Howard, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my companion through whatever the future holds for us? Tears welled in Gabriella's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Yes, Levi Morgan, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner and whatever else we become to each other in the years to come. Levi slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly, as if made for her. Then he leaned forward to kiss her, pouring all his love and hope and gratitude into the embrace. When they parted, Gabriella was smiling through her tears. I have a confession to make, she said, taking his hands in hers. I saw this moment months ago. It was one of the clearest visions I've ever had. You, me, this place, this question. It was what gave me the courage to come west, to follow the path that led to you. You knew all along we'd end up here? Levi asked, amazed. I knew it was possible, she corrected gently. Visions show potential, not certainty. We made this happen, Levi, with our choices and our courage. She touched his face, her eyes shining with love. And now I want to show you something else I've seen, something we're going to build together. She stood, helping him to his feet, and led him a short distance away from their picnic spot, to the edge of the rise overlooking the river valley. Here, she said, gesturing to the empty space before them. This is where our home will be. A real home, Levi, not just a cabin. A place for children to grow and for friends to gather. Her voice took on the distant quality it had when she was describing her visions. I can see it so clearly, a house with wide porches and many windows to let in the light. A garden where I'll grow herbs and vegetables. Fruit trees and shade trees for hot summer days. As she spoke, Levi could almost see it too, the house taking shape in his mind's eye, solid and welcoming. A true home unlike any he'd known since childhood. Children? He asked, focusing on that part of her vision. Gabriella nodded, a secret smile playing at her lips. 3, I think. Though the future is always in motion. She looked up at him, suddenly shy. Is that something you want, Levi? A family? With you? Levi drew her close, his heart full to bursting. It's everything I want, Gabriella. Everything I never dared hope for until you came into my life. They stood there together on the rise, looking out over the land that had brought them together, the river that had risen, the ranch that had sheltered them, the community that had gradually embraced them both. Below, they could see the town of Cottonwood Springs in the distance, rebuilt and thriving after the flood. No one's mocking the cowboy who took in a madwoman now, Gabriella said with a touch of humor, following his gaze. No, Levi agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Now they're just wondering when the wedding will be. Spring, Gabriella said decisively. When the wildflowers are blooming again. We'll be married right here, where our new home will stand. And as the autumn sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Levi and Gabriella began to plan their future together, a future built on trust and understanding, on shared hardship and shared joy, on a love that had begun with a warning about rising waters and would continue to grow through all the seasons of their lives. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the Arizona spring in full glory with wildflowers carpeting the rise where they had chosen to exchange their vows. The entire town of Cottonwood Springs and all the neighboring ranchers had turned out for the occasion, setting aside work and worries to celebrate with the couple who had, in their own way, brought the community closer together. Levi stood beneath an arch of cottonwood branches and early roses, more nervous than he'd been before any battle, yet more certain of his path than he'd ever been. Sheriff Taylor stood beside him as his best man, both men dressed in their finest, though Levi kept tugging at his collar as if it were too tight. Settle down, Morgan, Taylor muttered. She's not going to change her mind. I know, Levi replied, managing a smile. Just can't believe this is really happening. Then the small gathering grew quiet, and Levi looked up to see Gabriella approaching on John Henderson's arm, the rancher having offered to give her away in the absence of her own father. But Levi barely registered Henderson's presence. All he could see was Gabriella in a gown of pale blue, her auburn hair crowned with wildflowers, her face radiant with happiness as she walked toward him. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt, with promises exchanged under the open sky, witnessed by the people who had become their extended family. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could likely be heard all the way to the next county. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up on the flat ground below the rise, laden with food contributed by everyone in attendance. There was music and dancing, laughter and a few happy tears, stories shared of the flood and the rebuilding, of the strange twist of fate that had brought a Boston lady with second sight to the Arizona territory and into the arms of a solitary rancher. As the sun began to set, Levi found a moment to draw his new wife away from the festivities, leading her to the spot where the foundation of their new home had already been laid. "Happy, Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, still marveling at the change in her name, in both their lives. "Completely," Gabriella replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you, husband?" "More than I ever thought possible," Levi said honestly, looking out over the gathering of friends and neighbors, then back to the woman in his arms. "You know, when you first came to town with your warning about the river, I never imagined we'd end up here. Didn't you?" Gabriella's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I did. Well, not exactly this, but I knew we were meant to find each other. Some things are just written in the stars, Levi Morgan. And can those stars tell you what happens next?" Levi asked, curious as always about the extent and limitations of her gift. Gabriella smiled, a smile full of secrets and promises. "Some things I see clearly, others are just impressions, possibilities." She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "But this, I'm certain of." It took Levi a moment to understand, and when he did, his eyes widened in wonder. "You're going to have a baby," Gabriella confirmed, her eyes shining. "Our first child, Levi, due in the winter." Joy surged through him, so intense it almost took his breath away. Levi gathered Gabriella in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh out loud. "Careful," she admonished, still laughing. "We have months yet before we meet this little one." "A baby," Levi said, setting her down gently but keeping her close. "Our baby. I never thought. After everything." "I know," Gabriella said softly, understanding all he couldn't put into words. "But we've been given a second chance, both of us. A chance to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." They stood together as twilight deepened around them, the sounds of the wedding celebration continuing below, the foundation of their future home solid beneath their feet. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had guided Gabriella west, that had witnessed the rising of the river and the beginning of their love story. "They mocked the cowboy who took in a madwoman," Levi murmured, his voice tender with memory and hope. "But look at us now." "Look at us now," Gabriella echoed, raising her face for his kiss as the day of their wedding gave way to the first night of their married life, and the promise of all the days and nights to come. In the years that followed, the legend of Gabriella Howard Morgan and her prediction of the Great Flood became part of Cottonwood Springs folklore, told and retold with various embellishments, but always with the same core truth, that a stranger with an extraordinary gift had come to warn them, and in doing so, had found her home and her heart's companion. The house that Levi and Gabriella built on the rise overlooking the river valley became a landmark in its own right, a spacious, welcoming place with wide porches just as Gabriella had envisioned, surrounded by gardens and orchards that thrived under her care. It became a gathering place for the community, a haven for those in need, and most importantly, a home filled with love and laughter. Their first child, a daughter they named Hope, was born that winter, with Mary Henderson serving as midwife. She had Gabriella's green eyes and Levi's quiet strength, and from an early age, showed signs of having inherited her mother's gift of sight, though in a different form and empathy, so deep it sometimes seemed she could read the hearts of those around her. 2 years later, twins joined the family, a boy and girl named Daniel and Lily, completing the trio Gabriella had foreseen. The Morgan children grew up knowing both their parents' stories, understanding that their family had been forged in unlikely circumstances and through extraordinary events. Levi's ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, expanding to include the Henderson property when John and Mary decided to move into town in their later years. Gabriella's gardens became famous throughout the territory for their medicinal herbs and unusual plants, drawing people from far and wide seeking remedies and, occasionally, insights. For Gabriella continued to have visions, though they came less frequently as the years passed. She used her gifts sparingly and wisely, helping when she could, always careful to explain that what she saw were possibilities, not certainties. Her reputation grew not as a mystic or a madwoman, but as a wise woman with an unusual talent and a generous heart. Levi, too, found his place in the community fully established at last. No longer the solitary rancher living on the outskirts of town, he became a respected voice in local affairs, a steady presence in times of trouble, and a friend to many who had once kept their distance. But it was in their private life together that both Levi and Gabriella found their greatest fulfillment. The love that had begun so unexpectedly during a time of crisis deepened and matured through the years, weathering the inevitable storms of life and growing stronger for having faced them together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children nearly grown and the ranch thriving, Levi and Gabriella returned to the spot where they had exchanged their vows 2 decades earlier. The wildflowers still bloomed there each spring, and the view of the river valley was as beautiful as ever, though the town of Cottonwood Springs had grown considerably in the intervening years. "Do you ever regret it?" Levi asked as they sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Coming west? Staying here with me?" Gabriella turned to look at him, her face still beautiful to him despite the lines that time had etched around her eyes and mouth. "Never," she said with the same certainty she'd always possessed. "This is where I was meant to be, Levi. With you. In this place, building this life. I knew it from the moment I first saw your ranch in my vision." Levi took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it still fit in his own after all these years. "I'm glad you followed that vision," he said softly. "And I'm even more glad you stayed after the river receded." "As if I could have left," Gabriella said with a smile. "I'd found my heart's home at last. Why would I ever want to leave it?" They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and would continue to shine on their story for all the years to come, the story of a cowboy and a madwoman who had found in each other the understanding and acceptance they'd both been seeking, and who had built from that foundation a life of purpose, joy, and abiding love. And in Cottonwood Springs, the story was told of how they had all mocked the cowboy who took in a madwoman, until she predicted the river would rise, and in doing so, changed not only the fate of the town, but the course of 2 lives destined to intertwine against all odds. A reminder that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources, and the greatest love from the most unlikely beginnings.